let's start with a little bit of background on the Egoic Lotus. In A Treatise on Cosmic Fire, DK introduces us to this structure, which exists on the highest three subplanes of the mental plane. Thank you to you for creating this very informative illustration, and which consists of 9 petals in 3 tiers, and an innermost group of 3 closed petals, making a total of 12 petals. The 3 tiers are the knowledge, love, and sacrifice tiers. Also within each tier exists the knowledge, love, and sacrifice petals of that tier. Though DK develops his thesis in accordance with the symbol of the lotus, he tells us that the petals can also be seen as spokes of a great wheel, and are, however they may be visualized, in fact, great vortices of force. Each of us is in process of unfolding the petals of our own egoic lotus, with the petals so far unfolded representing the harvested qualities of our life in the 3 worlds since the time of our individualization, whether that was on the moon chain, in Lemuria, or in Atlantis. And the unopened petals representing as yet unrealized capacities and abilities. Once opened, the particular qualities of each petal demonstrate through our personality life. Taken together, the 9 petals represent the entire human journey from individualization to the 4th initiation, at which time the causal body is shattered and the influence of the egoic lotus is transcended. It's worth noting that those egos incarnated on Earth from the moon chain had already opened 1 or more petals and were thus the natural leaders of humanity. In fact, the Buddha, in all likelihood, was working to unfold his inner tier of petals when he transferred to the Earth chain. The unfolding of the egoic lotus is directly related to other ways of viewing one's progress on the path. For example, the raising of the Kundalini, the progressive forming and energizing of triangles of chakras, the 6 stages of building the Antakarana, and one's progressive responsiveness to first the exoteric and later the esoteric rulers of the astrological signs. As Jeff pointed out, the gradual development of becoming a chela from the first stages to the last. All these ways of charting our progress are interrelated and happen simultaneously. It's as though the same story is being told by DK over and over in different ways, and it's up to us to interrelate these in such a way that we get this synthetic understanding. This is, in my view, one of the greatest ways in which DK tells this story. Okay, development of the lowest or knowledge tier of petals takes place in the halls of ignorance and is associated with the physical etheric plane and the 3rd aspect of divinity. The ultimate goal of this tier is development of the lower mind and the beginning of personality integration. Development of the middle or love tier of petals takes place in the halls of learning, is associated with the astral plane and the 2nd aspect of divinity. During his or her sojourn under the influence of this tier, the indwelling jiva becomes aware of the subjective pair of opposites and begins to feel the impress of the soul. Development of the highest or sacrifice tier of petals takes place in the halls of wisdom and is associated with the mental plane, the first aspect of divinity, and thus with initiation. During one's time in this tier, the indweller becomes increasingly soul-infused and is preparing to enter the fifth kingdom in nature. The knowledge and love tier of petals rotate clockwise, while the sacrifice tier rotates counterclockwise, representing the reversal on the wheel of life accomplished during one's unfoldment of the previous tier. The innermost three petals, called the petals of synthesis, are progressively stimulated during the first three initiations and unfold entirely at the fourth. In the very center of the lotus is the central fire, described as the jewel within the lotus, or a jewel with 7 facets, which represents the influence of Shambhala and the monad. In EP2, DK draws a correlation between the first 3 soul laws and the 3 types of petals. So, though the entire egoic lotus is formed under the influence of the law of magnetic impulse, the law of sacrifice further conditions the petals of sacrifice. The law of magnetic impulse further conditions the petals of love, and the law of service further conditions the petals of knowledge. The opening of each petal takes place in 4 stages. During the first stage, called organization, which takes the longest to unfold by far, the indweller gradually gains knowledge of the work that lies ahead during his or her association with any particular petal. Vitalization, the second stage, comes about through the touch of the soul and is characterized by vibrational awareness and experience. Unfoldment, the third stage, brings completion and a degree of mastery over the challenges that any given petal represents, a kind of limited enlightenment. The actual opening of a petal, a stage beyond unfoldment, is produced by the pouring in of solar fire, thus bringing access for the indwelling jiva to a life-changing new stream of energy. One may be organizing one petal and vitalizing another, with both of these activities contributing to the actual opening of yet another petal. Okay, the entire first tier of petals, plus the first petal of each tier, as well as the organizing first stage for each petal, is associated with the physical etheric plane. The entire second tier, the second petal of each tier, as well as the second stage, called vitalization, is associated with the astral plane, which in later stages becomes impressed by energy from the Buddhic plane. And finally, the entire third tier of petals, the third petal of each tier, as well as the third stage, called unfoldment, is associated with the mental plane. Though, as earlier mentioned, the jiva is at any given time primarily centered in and focused on a particular petal, he or she may also be in process of organizing, that is, gaining knowledge of what will be required of the next petal. All of this works out on the 3 lower planes, the physical, astral, mental planes. So by way of review, and in order to get an overall sense of what stages of consciousness the 9 petals of the Egoic Lotus represent, let's take a look at a summary description from a treatise on cosmic fire, which starts with the attributes of the lowest knowledge tier of petals. DK says, the Brahma aspect, that in which the not self or material aspect is apparent and predominant, this covers the subhuman stages and the first 3 cycles of the personality life. So this tier is basically about developing the sheaths that make up the personality. So we have the first cycle, which is the savage state. This correlates with the first or knowledge petal of the knowledge tier of petals. There is no one in incarnation today who hasn't opened at least this one petal. The second cycle, average man. This correlates with the second or love petal of the knowledge tier of petals, during which time desire and personal love are developed. A lot of people are in this place around the planet. This represents the astrally polarized bulk of humanity. The third cycle, intellectual, successful man. This correlates with the third petal of the knowledge tier of petals and with the fourth petal, which is the knowledge petal of the second or love tier of petals. So we get back to each of these, but for now we're just doing a quick survey. Continuing with DK's summary from TCF, the Vishnu aspect, that in which the love wisdom aspect gradually predominates and emerges through the medium of the Brahma aspect, meaning that the gains made in the second tier of petals demonstrate through the lowest tier. The soul demonstrates through the personality. It covers the final two stages of the human personality life and that period of egoic growth which embraces the final 2 initiations. First cycle on this tier, the path of probation. This correlates with the 5th and 6th petals, the love and sacrifice petals of the second tier, and thus finishes one's work on this tier. Notice how things are accelerating quickly here. The second cycle, the path of initiation, till the 3rd initiation, correlates with petals 7, 8, and 9, thus encompassing the sacrifice tier of petals, with each petal of this tier representing one of the 3 first initiations, one of the first 3 initiations. The 3rd cycle, that covering the 4th and 5th initiations. This correlates with the opening of the 3 inner petals and the shattering and subsequent dissipation of the causal body. Okay, now let's focus in on the petals most relevant to aspiration and discipleship, beginning with petal 4, the first or knowledge petal of the soul influenced love tier of petals. So as we consider each of the petals of this and the next tier, think about which ones seem most relevant to your stage of growth. So it's a terrific system for determining your place on the path. Okay, upon entering the influence of the second tier, one has already developed a strong lower mind intellect through one's work on the previous petal, and is now preparing, here's the previous petal, petal 3, and is now preparing to develop the mechanism that will allow him or her to come under the influence of the soul, at first unconsciously, and later in this tier with fuller awareness. So this tier is all about soul influence, but it starts unconsciously with petal 5. It only unfolds gradually through petal 5 and 6. Through work with the 4th petal, the indwelling jiva, we're told, begins his or her transition into the kingdom of God. The name of the lotus associated with those who are working at this level is not given by DK, but Michael Robbins has dubbed this stage lotuses of integration, since it is here that personality integration takes place. Whereas the 5th and 6th petals of this central tier are ruled by the law of magnetic impulse, the 4th petal is primarily conditioned by the law of service. Additionally, this petal is ruled by the sign Cancer, and thus by the element of water, which also rules the other two petals of this tier, thereby forming a water triangle or triplicity. The fourth petal is also ruled by the third ray, as are all the petals of the first two tiers. Important point, all the petals of the first two tiers are ruled primarily by the third ray, and has a close association with the knowledge petals of the other two tiers of petals. All the etheric centers of the fourth subplane of the mental plane, as well as the throat center, the alta major, and the physical brain itself, are energized through one's work with the fourth petal. Though a lunar petal, this petal represents the beginning of one's transition from fire by friction to solar fire. It is particularly responsive to both the astral permanent atom and the mental unit, less so to the physical permanent atom, which rules the lowest tier of petals. Through work with this fourth petal, the jiva begins to move beyond individual development of the physical, astral, and mental sheaths, for he or she is now begins to sense the realm of causes, the source of his or her subjective life, to sense not just God transcendent, but also God immanent. This developing feeling for the subjective strengthens the fledgling personality ray and initiates a deep interplay between soul and personality, though as yet that interplay is primarily unconscious. In terms of sacred geometry, we could say that the influence of the upper point of the triangle, which stands on the causal levels of the mental plane and which synthesizes all the pairs of opposites that demonstrate on the lower 18 subplanes, is at first sensed, this upper point is at first sensed, then actively sought. It's the seeking for the source, for the cause of things. This leads to the beginning stages of inclusive understanding, which brings in the energy of Libra, and with it, the desire to balance the influence of the soul and personality. Through the sensing of this abstract source of mind, the jiva begins to expand his or her experience of mind, of manas, which has huge implications. For the jiva now realizes that a higher part of him, herself, lives beyond, altogether beyond personality expression. This realization remains unintegrated, but the sense of a higher self definitely begins to exert itself. DK describes this stage as, quote, higher knowledge applied through love on the physical and astral planes. Higher knowledge stimulates the love aspect. Remember, this is the second tier, or the love tier of petals, which demonstrates through selfless caring, respect, and regard. We're still very much in a personality place with this petal, but these qualities of selfless caring and respect and begin to come to the fore. It is perhaps for this reason that the color rose is added to the orange, green, and violet to characterize the first tier of petals. But by far, the most important gain made on petal 4 is personality integration. For it is here that the indwelling jiva heals the cleavages between his or her mental, astral, and physical plane expressions of consciousness, thereby creating a free flow of energy between these three vehicles. This integration results in a vivification of the personality ray, which synthesizes the rays of the mental, astral, and physical sheaths. It also brings the personality ray into direct relation with the soul ray, which, among other things, fosters selfless participation in community, national, and world affairs. So before this time, on the first tier, your personality sheaths and the rays of them were working to heal those cleavages and working. And so in a sense, the source of energy at that point is the personality ray, because that ends up being the synthesizing ray. So all work in that first year is done to prepare the indweller for this stage, which is this point of integration that happens at the fourth petal. Through personality integration, the indweller begins the long road from mass consciousness in Cancer, the ruling sign of this petal, to individuation in Leo. This transition, as well as the newly gained personality integration, allow for the I am consciousness of Leo to come to the fore, resulting in an inner clash between the influences of mass and individual consciousness, between the expectations of society and family on one hand, and the emerging sense of self on the other. Instead of representing how one should live and feel, the influence of society and family is now increasingly experienced as that which must be overcome in the battle for expression of a truer sense of self. Later, as personality integration takes further hold, the challenge becomes to actually express that which has been integrated. In spite of the Leonian influence, this fourth petal is nonetheless a lunar petal in the astral tier of petals, whose element is water and is still very much under the rule of the mutable cross. Thus, the greatest difficulty confronting the jiva at this level is learning to penetrate the glamour of the astral plane so that he or she might increasingly come under the influence of the mental plane, which rules the next tier. The jiva at this stage is not yet able to free him or herself from desire, but having set up the observer, is able to better understand his or her desires. In fact, the whole process during this tier is coming into this understanding, and thus more effectively trace them to their source. This leads to a gradual reorientation during which one's emotional life begins to express itself on the higher subplanes of the astral plane, eventually opening the door to aspiration and the beginning stages of awareness of a higher objective. Aspiration brings in the energy of Neptune, which rules Cancer esoterically. Here it is. And hierarchically. And importantly at this stage also rules Leo esoterically from behind a veiling sun, and is thus the planetary influence that instigates, through the jiva's budding aspiration, higher longing, and upward reaching, the journey from Cancer to Leo, and thus from lunar to solar consciousness. So you can see a lot happens at this stage that's represented by the fourth petal. This move from Cancer to Leo also forms a bridge between the halls of ignorance and the halls of learning, which opens the jiva's consciousness to a subjective world of meaning and significance. Through one's development under this petal's influence, the jiva moves from a strictly lunar realm to the beginning stages of an awareness that the solar realm is the true realm of one's being. That's part of that sensing of that higher source. Though this realization is still experienced through the astral vehicle, which is itself becoming more responsive to impressions from the soul. Okay, now let's take a look at petal 5. I would guess that my guess that the great bulk of people here in this conference are in this middle tier of petals at 4, 5, and 6, with possibly some working with the 7th petal. Okay, so these are, the relevant petals for our study. So petal 5 stands at a midway point between the lower 4 lunar petals and the higher 5 solar petals. Petal 5 is the love petal within the love tier of petals, and therefore makes available those energies that shift the indweller from a personality expression of love developed during unfoldment of petal 2, the love petal of the first tier, to a soul-inspired love of the real. But since at the beginning of this 5th petal work, the scales have not yet tipped towards the soul, the battle between the pairs of opposites is at its most intense, resulting in many lives of turmoil. For this reason, petal 5 is deeply associated with the tests and trials of Scorpio. Decay characterizes this petal as being expressive of higher intelligent love, which brings it fully under the influence of 5th ray Venus. Thus, it is during the work done here that the solar angel becomes the quote-unquote downward gazing soul, during which time the soul gives greater meditative attention to its vehicle. During development of the first tier of petals, the solar angel is absorbed in its own tasks, of which we know nothing. During the Jiva's 4th petal work, the solar angel begins to take notice of the personality's efforts to form a bridge. But it's not until the Jiva's engagement with the 5th petal that the impress of the soul influence significantly increases. So a bit on the numerological implications. This additional soul impression is enhanced by an alignment of the numbers 2 and 5, which are the numbers of this 5th petal on the 2nd tier of petals, thus aligning the Jiva first with the soul, the 2nd aspect, demonstrating on the 2nd subplane of the 5th plane, and through the soul contact with Venus, who has a 5th ray soul and a 2nd ray monad, and with 5th ray Sirius flowing through Leo, the 5th sign, and Jupiter, the 2nd ray lord of our solar system. You could do a whole presentation just on the numerical significances, but I'll spare you. The colors of petal 5 are a double rose. It doesn't show that well here, but you can see the rose influence, orange, and blue. The transition from fire by friction to solar fire continues at this stage, but whereas in petal 4, a balance of these fiery influences is achieved, the balance of fire by friction and solar fire. In petal 5, there is, in the later stages, what DK calls a soaring into the influence of solar fire, during which time aspiration is much increased. You could say it's the real petal of aspiration in that sense. Though a part of the astral tier, petal 5 is engaged with all 3 planes of human endeavor. In fact, a high degree of personality achievement is reached during one's work on this petal. And though the indweller is still personality-based, under Scorpio's influence, the Jiva is gradually dying to form-oriented pleasures, and yet at the same time becoming under the Leonian influence, what DK calls a point of fiery excellence. The victory of individualization in Leo leads to and is tempered by the death of personality influence in Scorpio. Thus, this in turn leads back to Leo in order to develop the I am that stage of consciousness made possible through one's work in Scorpio. This petal's strong association with Leo and Scorpio suggests that it is during this stage that preparation for the first initiation begins, to be continued in petal 6 and finally consummated in petal 7, at which time petal 5 fully opens. We have an analogy of this process in Egyptian mythology, wherein the Egyptian god, sun god Ra, who represents Leo, confronts the Scorpio serpent each night so that Ra may rise again in the morning on a higher turn of the spiral. Through the Jiva's work with petal 5, higher mental plane contact expands, which in turn increases the influence of the esoteric rulers of all the signs, resulting in increased creativity and, most importantly, the opportunity to reverse one's path on one's direction on the wheel of life. The first part of the Antakarana, which marks a path between the mental unit and the causal body, begins to be forged, thus making the mental unit the permanent atom most associated with the fifth petal. This sets up a guiding rapport between soul and personality, as shown in this chart. Though now mentally focused, the Jiva is not yet mentally polarized, a stage not reached until work on the highest tier of petals is in process. Mental polarity does not mean that one is centered in the thinking self of his or her lower mind, but rather that the mind is filled with soul light, which then becomes the environment wherein one's thoughts are created. That stage, which allows one to hold the mind steady in the light, is not reached until one's eighth petal work is undertaken. Now, development of mental focus, on the other hand, begins during the Jiva's third petal work and comes to fruition during petals 4 and 5. This development takes the Jiva further into the halls of learning, which opens his or her consciousness to the realm of inner significance and the patterns that determine this significance. For example, one becomes aware of the actual rather than the illusory meaning of language, the actual rather than the illusory connection between people, and the actual rather than the illusory causes of personal and global events. This is a game changer. It dramatically affects the indwelling Jiva's behavior, allowing him or her to create a much more meaningful rapport with the outer world. During the first phase of one's fifth petal work, the indweller is still personality identified. During the second phase, a terrific struggle and reorientation ensues. That's this vacillation between Scorpio-Leo influences that creates this struggle. During the third phase, there's a great soaring into solar fire, and the scorpionic influence that leads to death of personality truly begins to take hold, which in turn fosters an increasingly solar and thus impersonal perspective. The soul, which is the higher of the pairs of opposites, begins to be deeply felt. Yet the demands of personality life, the lower of the pairs of opposites, is still a very strong factor in the jiva's life. Caught between these pairs of opposites, the jiva attempts to balance soul and personality, and thus becomes preoccupied with the Leonian question, who am I? Remember, the fifth petal stands between the lower four and the higher four petals. It's the fifth of 9. Thus, it is that during the 3 stages of the unfolding of petal 5, one begins to transfer from the mutable to the fixed cross. This transfer is not completed. The influence of both crosses is present during all 3 fifth petal stages, but during one's sojourn through them, the weight gradually shifts from the mutable to the fixed cross through an increased responsiveness to the esoteric rulers of the signs. Okay, just as the path of evolution characterizes the first 3 petals, the path of personality ambition characterizes the 4th and 5th petals. For the personality is nearing, at this stage, nearing full development. And the jiva senses the attractive power that this development creates. Those at this stage want to be noticed and to become notable among their peers. Remember, this is ruled by Leo as well as Scorpio. Thus, even though soul contact has become a strong influence, they find themselves being drawn to the center of their own stage. DK calls this period advanced man. The progress of many temporarily stalls at this point because other people's recognition of their personality development is so seductive. But for those that finally move on, and all but a very few eventually do, the Scorpio influence begins to reveal the emptiness and the fundamental insufficiency of personal ambition. The indweller then retires from the self-created spotlight and begins to seek the fruits of decentralization. The Leonian I am becomes the seeker of I am that. Through this decentralizing influence and through the potency exerted by this love petal of the love tier of petals, the jiva begins to develop the Leonian attribute that DK calls the fiery heart. And as a result of this more impersonal experience of love, the indweller steps onto a higher turn of the path of aspiration. Here, 2 kinds of identities are vividly and continuously presented, and the choice that will eventually lead to reversal on the wheel of life in Libra becomes the jiva's overriding concern. For the indweller realizes that at some point, he or she, in full conscious awareness, will have to lay the personality life upon the altar of service. It is this awareness that eventually opens the indweller to the possibility of group consciousness, though the actual state of group consciousness still lies far in the future. Notice how during our explorations of petals 4 and 5, we have progressed through 4 of the 5 signs between Cancer and Scorpio. Virgo's influence comes in during petal 6, the sacrifice petal of the middle tier. Why sacrifice? Because the probationary disciple at this level is now consciously working to give up his or her own desires for the sake of the higher group and for the sake of the group, for the higher good and for the sake of the group. This effort is guided by feeling and by still the astral plane, last petal on the astral tier of petals, and by a sense of affinity rather than by clear-headed vision of the plan. that won't come until the next tier of petals. And thus, work in petal 6 is still colored by an unconscious expectation for a return of the love from those one seeks to serve. Nonetheless, this conscious effort to give is of a much, much higher order than the blind sacrifice that characterizes work on the sacrifice petal of the first tier. That sacrifice being driven by karma and the resulting environmental circumstances. Through increased decentralization, the personality ambition of the fifth petal has now been left behind, but the jiva is still in danger of succumbing to spiritual ambition, the appropriation of spiritual pursuits for the aggrandizement of the personality, what Chogyam Trungpa calls spiritual materialism. The sign most associated with petal 6 is Pisces, thus completing the water triangle of signs that expresses itself through this tier. As the last sign of the zodiac, Pisces often marks the point of transition from the mutable to the fixed cross, and thus from the influence of fire by friction to that of solar fire. And so it is with the jivas working with petal 6, who through tremendous personal effort finally conquer selfishness, and thus ready themselves for probationary discipleship. A deeper, more detached awareness of the world of meaning and significance comes into focus. This was felt in petals 4 and 5, fanning the flames of aspiration. But here, the possibilities opened through awareness of the world of meaning are more deeply explored. Impressions from the higher mental plane intensify, and the presence of the soul is now definitely and more consistently felt. This contact prepares the probationer for that transition that leads from the second tier of petals to the third, and with it from the halls of learning to the halls of wisdom. The qualities of decentralization and the conquering of selfishness gained on the sixth petal allow the jiva to set up an inner observer who is able to bring to light all hidden personality influences. Virgo, a sign at the stage of true service, based on talents developed during the fifth petal and refined during the sixth petal, now trains the mind in preparation for the move from probationary disciple to true discipleship. Testing designed to prepare the disciple for the first initiation marks this period. Interestingly, the planets involved in that testing are Vulcan and Pluto, which are the esoteric rulers of Virgo and Pisces, respectively. Since unfoldment of this petal completes the work of the middle tier, its vivification represents a united expression of all three petals. The fourth petal brings in higher knowledge applied through love. Petal 5 demonstrates its higher intelligent love, and petal 6 brings forth the quality of loving, intelligent sacrifice. Notice that the qualities are cumulative. The knowledge gained through petal 4 informs petal 5 as intelligent love, and the love gained in petal 5 informs the loving, intelligent sacrifice of petal 6. To work with these three astral tier, astral tier petals, the jiva's astral permanent atom becomes radiant. Okay, time permits me to say only a few words about the inner tier of petals, each petal of which has 5 colors associated with it. That number suggesting a definite orientation to the soul, just as the 4 colors of the middle tier suggest a personality orientation, and the 3 colors of the outer tier suggest an orientation to the personality vehicles. This inner tier of petals is organized and vitalized in the Hall of Wisdom, which has the effect of simultaneously unfolding the already vitalized middle tier of petals. The final unfolding of the inner tier of petals happens on the path of initiation as a result of the quote-unquote strenuous and abnormal efforts of the disciple, efforts which are aided by the electrical work of the initiator wielding the rod of power. So first up, petal 7, the knowledge petal of the sacrifice tier, where even spiritually motivated personal ambition has been left behind. This petal becomes organized and vitalized through a conscious utilization of all that the disciple has gained through work on the lower 6 petals. All is brought to bear at this point. All thought and action is done with the group in mind. For the mental plane, which is where these 3 petals are found, the light of sacrifice comes into full display, and all that lies within the consciousness of the indweller is illumined by that light. Whereas the middle tier of petals is focused on acquisition, including acquiring the needed skills to work as a disciple, during one's sojourn on the highest tier, the focus shifts to joyous, intelligent service. The will to sacrifice through knowledge. After all, this is the knowledge petal on the mental plane, now dominates the disciple's 3 vehicles. Thus, the jiva uses everything that has been gained in service to others. Vitalization of this petal is synchronous with the opening of the 5th petal, which together makes possible the first initiation. So the final opening of any petal, the true opening, is the final stage, a much later stage. So you could be working, in this case, for instance, working to vitalize the 7th petal, and it's through that vitalization that the 5th petal actually fully opens. On petal 8, which is the petal of love on the mental plane, a conscious, steady application of all the powers of the soul in service to humanity with no thought of return, unlike the 6th petal, nor any desire for reward for the immense sacrifice involved, characterizes one's mode of being. The initiate is now uplifted by the very vibration that he or she is transmitting, thus demonstrating the scientific truth of Christ's words that it truly is better to give than to receive. The indweller then experiences the reality that sacrifice means to make sacred, and all such acts bring great joy to the bestower, for the will to love dominates the consciousness. No influence from the clockwise wheel of form can now inhibit the jiva's forward motion. This marks the achievement of Venusian consciousness. You know, in the 5th petal, the Venus influence came in, but here on this middle petal of the last tier, one truly identifies with the consciousness that Venus represents. A perfect blending of heart and mind. With the mind held steady in the light and the power of illumination flooding the meditative life, the initiate is now almost completely soul infused. It is during one's sojourn under the influence of this 8th petal that the second initiation is taken, and the powers of Buddhi stream in through the agency of Scorpio, Mercury, and the 4th ray. Sorry not to have had much time to talk about the colors of these petals, which is a profound study in and of itself. For example, 3 of the 5 colors of this 8th petal yellow, blue, and violet, link the now initiate consciousness to the Buddhic plane. Yellow is the color of fourth ray and of Mercury, the messenger of the gods. And on the wings of this color streams the enlightened impressions of the intuition. At the same time, the rose and blue act as a bridge between the sixth ray of devotion and the divine love of the second ray of love wisdom. Okay, lastly, we have, and very briefly, we have the ninth and final petal, the petal of sacrifice on the sacrifice tier of petals, which is on the mental plane, obviously the higher mental plane. This brings the final union with the soul. DK tells us, which DK tells us demonstrates through a series of many lives spent by the initiate prior to his final emancipation. The initiate becomes in his or her sphere of influence like the great sacrifice, which is a way of saying that the jiva becomes to those whom he or she serves as the one initiator is to the initiate, thus giving a higher meaning to the words, God made man in his own image. Just as the astral permanent atom is perfected through the unfoldment of the sixth petal, through work on the ninth petal, the mental unit becomes a radiant point of light. DK describes this petal simply as the utter sacrifice of all forever. Okay, the Blue Books say very little about the opening of the three innermost petals of synthesis, except that their unfolding takes the initiate from the third to the fourth initiation, which in turn leads to the shattering of the causal body and a transcendence of the egoic petals altogether. Their opening reveals the jewel within the lotus, and for the first time, the initiate comes directly under the influence of the monad. As mentioned yesterday, the unfolding of the petals of the egoic lotus is made possible through the second law of the soul, the law of magnetic impulse. So this has been the briefest of brief introductions to the petals of the egoic lotus. Michael Ramans has recorded literally hundreds of hours of commentary on this subject. Even if you just listen to a few of these webinars, one possible approach is to go to those webinars on the fourth, fifth, and sixth petals, which I think for most of us we find most relevant, and they're just profoundly interesting. So I highly recommend them. You can find them on makara.com.